My name is Ellen Whitaker, and on the night of my grandmother's 75th birthday, I realized I wasn't really part of the family anymore. The party was held at a lakeside restaurant, the kind with white linen napkins and soft jazz playing from hidden speakers. My younger sister, Samantha, had planned everything. She called it a celebration of legacy. I arrived on time. I even wore the blue dress my grandmother once complimented me on. But when I walked in, no one turned to greet me, not even my mother. The host quietly pointed to a seat at the far end of the table, right next to the coffee station. Every few minutes, a server brushed past my chair, refilling cups, murmuring, "Excuse me," without looking up. Everyone else was in full celebration mode, laughing, clinking glasses, reminiscing about the good old days. Their stories were loud, warm, and very intentionally missing me. My older brother Max stood up to toast. He lifted his wine and said, "This might be the first Whitaker gathering without a single family meltdown. Cheers to peace." The whole table erupted with laughter. Samantha winked at him like they'd rehearsed it. My mother reached over, placed her hand gently on mine, and said in that sweet, poisonous tone of hers, "He's just joking. Don't take it personally, dear." I smiled and said nothing. My plate arrived last. Cold fish. I didn't complain. I just picked at it quietly while the others shared photos from their latest beach trip. The one I wasn't invited to because, as Samantha put it, "You're always so complicated." But something happened in the middle of dessert. Something small. Something I'll never forget. Grandma Ruth, who hadn't said much the entire evening, reached over while everyone was distracted. She touched my wrist lightly and placed something in my hand. A necklace. It was old. The kind of locket you might find in a dusty jewelry box, heavy and a little tarnished. I looked at her, confused. She didn't speak. She just nodded once, slow and steady, then turned back to her untouched slice of cake. That locket sat in my palm like a secret. I slipped it into my purse. Later, Samantha brought out a big sheet cake with pastel roses and the words, "To the matriarch," written in bold cursive. Everyone gathered around for photos, flash after flash, laugh after laugh. I wasn't in a single frame. In one of the group shots, I caught a glimpse of my own shoulder, blurred in the background behind a flower arrangement. As Mom raised her glass for her speech, she said with deep emotion, "Family is everything. We may not be perfect, but we stick together. That's what matters." I sipped my water. No one clinked glasses with me. At the end of the night, there were no hugs goodbye, just a series of polite, dismissive lines. "Thanks for coming. Take care. Drive safe." I stepped into my car, a beat-up Toyota with a heater that only worked on low, and just sat there for a moment in silence. Then I remembered the locket. I pulled it out and looked closer. The clasp was slightly loose. I pressed on the tiny groove at the top, and the locket clicked open. Inside was a tiny folded piece of paper, worn at the edges as if someone had opened and closed it 100 times. It read, "When truth needs a home, this will lead you there." Beneath it, 6 numbers, handwritten in faded blue ink. I didn't know what they meant, but I knew this wasn't just jewelry. It was a message, a beginning. Grandma Ruth didn't speak to me that night, but she didn't have to. In the middle of a room full of people pretending I didn't exist, she handed me something that said, "I see you. I always have." And that meant more than cake or toasts or fake smiles ever could. 2 days after the party, the necklace was still on my kitchen table. I hadn't worn it. I hadn't shown it to anyone. I just left it there next to my tea mug and a plate of untouched toast, like a question I wasn't ready to ask. The locket sat open, the tiny piece of paper still inside. I must have read those 6 faded numbers at least a dozen times. They didn't look like a phone number or a date, more like a code or a combination. And then, just before noon, an email came. The sender was someone I didn't know, admin at tb-legalgroup.com. Subject line, Ruth Whitaker, dash personal document, time sensitive period. At first, I thought it might be a scam, but the name Ruth Whitaker stopped me cold. I clicked. The message was brief and formal. A PDF was attached. Dear Miss Ellen Whitaker, per the instructions left by Ruth Whitaker, we are contacting you in connection with a sealed personal matter. The attached document includes details for in-person retrieval. Please bring valid ID. No additional parties are authorized. I opened the PDF with hands I didn't realize were shaking. It was a one-page letter on legal letterhead from a firm I'd never heard of. Thompson and Bell, based in Bainbridge Island. The letter confirmed that my grandmother had left behind a sealed envelope and private materials, set to be released only after her 75th birthday, and only to me, no one else. It felt like someone had just handed me a locked door, and that locket, with its strange little number, felt more and more like a key. I didn't call anyone, not my mother, not Max, certainly not Samantha. The next morning, I got in my car and drove. The legal office was quiet, tucked behind a bookstore and a florist in one of those sleepy blocks where time moves a little slower. The air smelled like salt and damp leaves. It was the kind of town my grandmother used to visit in the fall, back when we still took trips together. Inside, the receptionist, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted me by name. "You're Ellen," she said like it wasn't a question. "One moment." She disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, a man in a dark suit came out, holding a navy blue envelope in one hand and a small key, wrapped in white tissue in the other. He looked like someone who'd seen 100 strange family requests and still treated each one with care. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, offering a soft handshake. "Your grandmother was very clear about her wishes. She wanted this delivered to you personally, with no copies, no trail." He slid the envelope across the table. I took a breath and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, scrawled in my grandmother's familiar, upright print, the kind of writing that looked like it belonged in a ledger book from the 1940s. "Dear Ellen, if you're reading this, then things went how I feared. They won't say it out loud, but they've cut you out. That's why I set this aside for you. Quietly. Go to the Pacific National Bank in Port Townsend. Use the numbers from the locket. Everything you need to understand what happened is there. What you choose to do next is yours. I trust you." There were no dramatic revelations, no apologies, just simple instructions from someone who had spent a lifetime watching in silence. I thanked the man, tucked the letter into my coat, and drove. The bank in Port Townsend was quiet, almost like a set from an old movie. Polished floors, wood-paneled walls, the faint scent of lemon polish. At the front desk, I showed them the key and my ID. A few minutes later, I was led to a private room and handed a steel safety deposit box. I placed it on the table, hands suddenly unsure. When I opened it, I found 4 things. 1. A legal envelope stamped Whitaker Family Trust, amended 1998. 2. A USB drive labeled For Ellen. 3. A property deed for the house on Wildflower Lane, the one Samantha had remodeled and claimed as her own. 4. And a final handwritten note. This was always meant to be yours. They just told the story louder. I sat there for a long time, just breathing. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about truth, and how sometimes it has to be buried quietly until someone is brave enough to dig it up. I didn't open the folder right away. The safety deposit box was closed, the key returned, and I walked out of that bank with a weight in my bag that wasn't just paper. I drove home in silence. No radio, no calls. Just the soft hum of the tires on wet pavement and the rhythm of questions forming in my head. What had Grandma Ruth seen that the others ignored? What had she tried to protect? That night, I sat at my dining table, the same spot where the locket had sat for days. This time, I placed the manila envelope in front of me, the words on the front. Whitaker Family Trust, amended 1998, were handwritten in thick black marker. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first thing I saw was a copy of the original trust agreement, dated 1985, which listed all the usual suspects as beneficiaries: my mother, Max, Samantha, and me. But clipped behind it was a second document, labeled Amendment 1998, signed and notarized by my grandmother and 2 attorneys. That's when I found it. A single paragraph, neatly typed and underlined, read, "Effective immediately, Ellen Whitaker shall be designated the sole heir and primary beneficiary of the property located at 317 Wildflower Lane, Port Townsend, Washington." I read it again, and again. There was no ambiguity. Grandma Ruth hadn't just given me a gift. She had made a legal declaration 25 years ago, before the remodels, before Samantha's wedding in the backyard, before anyone started calling it Samantha's coastal home. It had never belonged to her. It had always been mine. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. The betrayal wasn't just emotional now. It was concrete, tangible, recorded in ink and legally binding. And then I remembered the USB. I plugged it into my old laptop, the one with the cracked corner and slow boot up. It whirred to life and a folder popped up with a single file. Photos. Inside were dozens of scanned documents and photographs. Things I hadn't seen in years. Birthday cards I made for Grandma as a child. Pictures of the 2 of us gardening. Handwritten letters I'd mailed from summer camp, carefully preserved and scanned into PDFs. And then, tucked between all the sentiment, were emails. Printed screenshots of messages exchanged between my mother, Max, and Samantha. Some dated as recently as 3 years ago. Subject lines like, "Re-keeping Ellen in the dark." She doesn't need to know about the Port Townsend title. "It's better this way. She never fit in anyway." One line from Samantha made my stomach turn. "She doesn't even like that house. She never had a real connection to Grandma. It makes sense for it to stay with us." I closed the laptop and stared at the wall, not in anger, not even in sadness. It was something colder, something heavier. I'd spent most of my adult life wondering if I'd imagined the distance, if maybe I was too sensitive, too quiet, too forgettable. But it wasn't in my head. They'd cut me out, not just from events or conversations, but from legacy, memory, and home. And now I held the proof. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the night. It was drizzling, the kind of soft rain that makes the world quieter, safer, more honest. I whispered into the dark, "I don't need to yell. I've got paper." I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. I wasn't thinking about lawyers or courtrooms. What I knew was this: they'd stolen something that wasn't just mine legally. It was mine in spirit, in relationship, in trust. And Grandma Ruth? She knew they would. That's why she left me more than just papers. She left me truth, neatly labeled, carefully timed, and placed in hands she trusted would use it, not to burn bridges, but to build something better. 3 days passed before I told anyone what I had found. Not my mother, not Max, not Samantha. Instead, I told Jules, a friend of mine from college, someone who now worked in legal records and had the kind of brain that could untangle family trusts in her sleep. We sat in her apartment surrounded by old case folders, takeout containers, and the hum of a window fan. I handed her the manila envelope. She read every page slowly without saying much. When she finally looked up, her face was calm but certain. "You know you own that house, right? Legally, unambiguously. This isn't even a gray area." I nodded. "You could file a quiet title action," she continued. "It wouldn't be hard. You've got signatures, dates, digital proof of fraud, and that deed. That's everything." But I didn't say yes right away. I wasn't after revenge. I wasn't planning a dramatic confrontation. I didn't want to kick in the front door and scream, "It was never yours." What I wanted What I needed was to do this the right way, the clean way, the way Grandma Ruth would have respected. So I made a list, not of what I'd say, but of what I wouldn't. The first step was silence. I didn't respond to Samantha's group text about family brunch next weekend. I didn't pick up when Max called just to check in. And when my mother left a voicemail saying she'd found a nice photo from the party where you're in the background smiling, I deleted it. There was a time when those things would have sent me into tears. Now, they only confirmed what I already knew. They were experts at pretending I mattered, as long as I stayed quiet, convenient, and out of the way. But Grandma had given me something they couldn't erase: paper, proof, position. I hired a local attorney in Port Townsend, someone quiet and efficient. She reviewed the documents and said exactly what Jules had said. "This is yours. Let's make it official." She filed a notice of ownership with the county. We initiated a formal eviction notice for non-title occupants, namely Samantha and her husband. Everything was done by the book. No drama, no theatrics, just forms and signatures. Within a week, Samantha received the letter. I expected an explosion. What I got was a voicemail, shaken, but measured. "Ellen, I'm confused. This has to be a mistake. The house, you haven't even lived there in years. We've poured money into it, my wedding, my nursery, and this is just cruel." I didn't respond. 2 days later, Mom called. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask why. She just said, "There's no need to drag this through court. Let's settle it privately. We're still family." And again, I said nothing, because by then I had realized something. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is structure, a boundary drawn in ink instead of blood. On the morning the process server delivered the official documents to Samantha's door, I wasn't there. I was walking by the water in Seattle, watching gulls skim the tide. My phone buzzed twice. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. They would move out. They had no choice. The house on Wildflower Lane, the one with the white shutters and the old magnolia tree out front, was coming back to me, but not as a trophy, not as a stage for bitterness. Something deeper was forming, a sense that this home, this piece of inheritance, now might become something far more meaningful than just a win. That afternoon, I walked into a hardware store. I bought paint swatches, floor plans, a new mailbox. I was building something. And the first brick was peace, not with them, but with myself. I didn't go to the house right away. After the papers were filed, the eviction finalized, and the keys returned, I let the house sit for a week, maybe out of respect, maybe out of fear, maybe because stepping into it again would make it all real. When I finally drove down Wildflower Lane, the magnolia tree in the front yard was just starting to bloom. Delicate white petals trembling in the spring breeze, exactly as I remembered them. Samantha and her husband had left it clean. Cold, but clean. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare. Only a faint smell of vanilla candles lingered in the hallway. I walked through it slowly. The creaky step on the back porch was still creaky. The kitchen window still looked out onto the same tangled garden Grandma Ruth used to tend every morning before coffee. And in the hallway upstairs, though freshly painted, I could still feel where the old photo frames once hung. The wall carried ghosts, soft ones that didn't scare me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was steady. And in that steadiness, a thought came. Quiet, but certain. This house wasn't just taken from me. It was meant to become something else. I sat on the floor in the empty living room, legs crossed, hands in my lap, and I asked out loud, "What would you want me to do with this, Grandma?" The answer came slowly, not in words, in memories, in the way she always left the back door open for neighbors, in the way she kept extra blankets in the hall closet, just in case someone needs to stay, in the way she never asked where someone came from, only whether they were hungry. By sunset, I knew. This house wouldn't be sold. It wouldn't be flipped for profit or rented out or turned into some monument of what could have been. It would be opened again, but this time for women like me. I spent the next 3 weeks planning. I reached out to a small nonprofit in Seattle that worked with middle-aged women displaced by family abuse, financial hardship, or quiet abandonment. Not the loud crisis cases, the silent ones, the ones no one saw falling through the cracks. They called them the invisible dispossessed. I told them I had a home and an idea. We called it the Locket House, a place for women who were told they were too much, too complicated, too expensive, too inconvenient to love. I fixed the plumbing, painted the walls soft shades of blue and cream, added shelves full of books, and kept the door unlocked during the day. The first resident moved in quietly with 2 suitcases and a paperback Bible. She didn't ask questions. Neither did I. By month's end, there were 3 women living at the Locket House. They shared the kitchen, cooked together, and sat on the porch in the afternoons drinking iced tea and talking about things they thought they'd buried forever. There were no curfews, no rules about grief, no forced smiles, just warmth and space and a reminder. You still matter. You always did. I never made a big announcement to the family. I didn't post photos. I didn't mail invitations. But word got around. One afternoon, I received a letter with no return address. The handwriting was familiar. It was from Samantha. Inside a single line. I didn't know how much she saw. Maybe I didn't want to. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer under the front desk. I didn't need closure. I had a purpose now, and that was more lasting than any apology. That night, I hung a small wooden sign on the gate, hand-carved by a woman who'd once been a guest here, now a volunteer. It read, "Some families forget. This house remembers." I used to think closure came with a conversation, that there had to be some final talk, one last confrontation, or a long, teary explanation. And then, you'd finally be able to move on, like a door slamming shut. But when the letters started arriving, I realized something else. Sometimes the door doesn't slam, it just quietly stops swinging. The first envelope came in late May. No return address, just my name in familiar script. Inside was a letter from my mother. She wrote that she was heartbroken by the turn of events, that she never meant for me to feel excluded, that things got complicated after Grandma Ruth's health began to decline, and they did the best they could. She underlined that sentence twice. At the end, she enclosed a check, $10,000, to help support whatever community effort you're building at the house. I didn't cash it. I didn't return the letter either. I folded both and placed them in a manila envelope labeled unspoken and tucked it in the back of my filing cabinet because I didn't need the money. And I didn't need a check to validate what I already knew was true. A few weeks later, a voicemail from Max. "Hey, Ellen, look, I know things have gotten weird. I just want to say, if you ever want to talk about anything, really, I'm here." It was the most emotion I'd heard in his voice in years. I appreciated it. I did. But I didn't call back. I wasn't angry anymore. But I also wasn't interested in pretending we could rewind the tape. The hardest one came from Samantha. She sent a letter, too, longer than I expected. She wrote about the renovations, the baby's room she painted, the garden she planted out back. She said the house had become her sanctuary, the one place she felt truly at peace, and that losing it felt like being erased. There was no direct apology, just a line that read, "I don't know how much Grandma told you, but I guess she saw more than I thought." I sat with that sentence for a while, because it said so much without saying much at all. I didn't write back. I wasn't being cruel, I was just done offering explanations. I had spent so many years trying to earn space in a family that had quietly decided I didn't belong. So many moments trying to translate myself into something easier to accept, softer, less difficult. But Grandma Ruth never asked me to do that. She just watched. She remembered. And in the end, she chose me. Not because I deserved it more, but because I never asked to be seen. And still, she saw me anyway. One afternoon in June, I was sitting on the porch of the Lockett house with a woman named Valerie. She was 62, newly divorced after decades of emotional neglect, and had arrived 2 weeks earlier with nothing but a rolling suitcase and a worn copy of Jane Eyre. She looked out over the lawn and said, "I used to think being quiet meant I didn't matter." I smiled. "No," I told her. "Sometimes it just means you're listening harder than everyone else." We sat in silence for a while. Birds chirped in the magnolia. The wind moved through the curtains behind us, and I realized something. I hadn't just inherited a house. I'd inherited a way of being, one that didn't need drama or declarations or explanations, just space, room to be, and enough dignity to let the past rest where it belonged. That evening, I wrote a note, not to anyone in my family, but to myself. It said, "You don't owe them answers. You owe yourself peace." I folded it in half, placed it inside the locket Grandma had given me, and snapped it shut. It didn't click loudly, but it closed. And that was enough. Some things don't announce their arrival. They unfold slowly, like morning light creeping across a floor. You don't notice the warmth until you stop and realize. You're no longer cold. That's how the Lockett house became more than just a home. At first, it was just a place for women to stay. A few nights, a few weeks, sometimes longer. The only rule was simple: come as you are. There were no therapy sessions unless asked for, no programs or stages or required stories, just space, just time, just quiet company. And somehow, that was enough. By the end of the summer, we had 5 women living in the house, each with her own room, her own story, and her own way of returning to herself. There was Valerie, who took over the garden, Dee, who baked muffins every Sunday and called them little apologies to herself, Shirley, who played piano in the evenings with a broken pinky finger and didn't care if she missed the keys. One night, we sat around the table after dinner, drinking chamomile tea and passing around a small box where we kept paper scraps of things we wished someone had said to us years ago. When it was my turn, I read one I had written earlier that week. "You're not difficult. They were just uncomfortable with your light." The women nodded. One of them reached for my hand. No one said anything for a while. And in that stillness, I realized something I had been too bruised to see before. This was what Grandma Ruth wanted, not just for me to reclaim a house, but to reclaim what a home could mean. Word started to spread, quietly, the way most good things do. A journalist from the local paper stopped by one day. She had heard whispers from the non-profit we partnered with about a small house on Wildflower Lane where women healed without fanfare. She asked to do a story. I said yes, but only if she kept the names private. The article ran on a Sunday. The headline read, "A house that doesn't ask where you've been, only if you're ready to rest." Below it was a photo of the front gate with a wooden sign carved by one of our residents. Some families forget. This house remembers. A week later, I got a letter from a stranger, a woman in her 70s, widowed, estranged from her daughter. She wrote, "I don't need a bed. I just wanted to say thank you. I've never heard anyone put it like that before, that a house could remember us, even when our people don't." I cried when I read that. Not from sadness, but from recognition. Because that's all any of us want, really, to be remembered. Not as perfect, not as easy, but as real, as worthy. I visit Grandma Ruth's grave twice a year. I don't bring flowers. She didn't care for them. I bring her stories. I tell her about the women, about how the garden's doing, about the magnolia tree and the piano, and the way someone always leaves a porch light on, just in case. I imagine her smiling, not wide, just enough. Because she didn't need to be loud to make a difference. She just needed to choose one person, one moment, one key, and she chose me. Sometimes I still wear the locket, not for decoration, for grounding. Inside it now is a new slip of paper. I wrote it on the first anniversary of the house reopening. It says, "You're not extra. You're exactly enough." I don't need to read it every day, but I like knowing it's there. Because the Locket House may have started with grief, silence, and old paper, but it lives now in laughter, coffee mugs, second chances, and morning light. And maybe most importantly, it lives in the women who walk in carrying nothing and leave carrying themselves. Sure. Here's a conclusion written in the same style and tone, tailored to Ellen's story in the Locket House. Ellen didn't just take back the house they tried to erase her from. She gave it a new meaning they could never touch. Through quiet strength, unwavering clarity, and a heart full of purpose, she turned silence into sanctuary. This wasn't a story of revenge. It was a story of becoming, without begging, of choosing healing when others chose control. If you've ever been overlooked, forgotten, or told you were too much, let Ellen's journey remind you. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need noise to be powerful. And you are always allowed to begin again. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, your voice belongs here. Always.